dears. So I was inspired to do this video because of my friend Dr. Michelle Mazur, because I talk a lot about identity shifts and how that's such a struggle and how so many people go through them and really need support. But I realized a lot of you may not know if you're going through an identity shift. And this is such a ripe time to talk about it because we've just gone through this big eclipse window. We're in Mercury retrograde. Like, a lot of the wounds and troubles from our past are showing up now. And they're asking to be healed. They're asking for us to do things differently than we have in the past. I mean, I think this is a thing that comes up for us all the time. I think on our soul's journey, we are always being invited to learn to do something differently, not fall down the same holes, to make a different choice, right? But this time especially, and maybe some of you are feeling this here in 2019, how challenging it is and how stuff that used to work isn't working the same way, and how, I mean, even as a global population, we're being asked to make different choices, right? In our systems, in our companies, in the way that we do our daily lives. Like, we're all being asked to shift our identities. I'm even thinking about the way we talk about gender, the way we talk about sex, the way we talk about race. We're always being asked to up-level, to play a higher game, right? To be a better and improved version of ourselves so that we can experience more peace and ease and freedom and joy. But what are the examples even in our personal lives? So I was thinking we could talk about the symptoms of being on the verge of an identity shift on a personal level. And, how do you know that that's what you're going through? How do you know that that's what you're facing? Well, I would say some examples of needing to approach an identity shift, meaning think about who you are in a different way. It can be as basic as growing up, like adulting, you know what I mean? It can be stepping out of the role of child or baby of the family into like stepping into a role as a manager in a job. How do I shift how I think about myself and how I present myself and who I understand that I am as who I used to be versus who I am now. For me, I noticed one of the ways that I keep reminding myself that I have shifted identity to a middle-aged woman is that I have friends who do really big, important jobs. Like, I have a friend who's a judge. Like, she's an actual elected judge. And sometimes I'm like, wow, like I'm such a grown-up, And then folks who become a mom, like, that's usually an identity shift that kind of, because of the hormones and all the process and all the celebration and it's a big deal, right, to become a parent. So that identity shift tends to have so many rituals around it that make it just kind of happen. But there's a lot of identity shifts that we're being invited into that don't really have their own rituals unless we make them. They don't have their own celebration or community acknowledgement in the same way. So I'm wondering if you who are watching this have an idea of an identity shift you've gone through or one that you're aware that you're facing. The symptoms, more than anything, I think, are usually fear, and often like depression or discouragement comes up a lot because it's like I have this dream, I have these big ideas, these visions of who I think I'm being called to be, and then I don't quite know how to get there. I don't know how to start fully thinking of myself as this new and different person who's still me, but a different version of me, a version of me I've never been. How do I, it's like, what's this new operating system, right? Like learning to use a new OS in a way. So, thinking of myself when I shifted into being a therapist, I mean, that had some ritual around it, right? Like I went through a graduation ceremony, and I had an office, and I took licensure testing and all that fun stuff. So that was a little bit easier to be like, yes, I'm a therapist and I'm going through this with other people. And there's just more of a communal acknowledgement. But when I went from therapy into what I do now, which is more soul medic and guide to people who are adulting like revolutionaries, that was all on me. Like I had to walk that identity shift on my own. How am I suddenly different? How am I attracting different people, like different than my therapy clients? I don't have an office anymore. Like, how am I self-defining in a way that matches what my dreams are? What my calling feels like. And walking through that process, it brings up all kinds of stuff. It brings up self-doubt. It brings up anxiety, it brings up fear, it brings up confusion for a lot of people that I work with. I notice that, like, people who are changing professions or starting a business or going out of having started a business into a corporate life. Like, how am I suddenly, a corporate employee? How can I suddenly be this different thing after I've been self-employed for 10 years, for example, or vice versa? People stepping out of, working for corporations into doing their own thing. There's so many more examples, but those are what are coming to me. Do you have a sense of what I'm talking about when I say identity shift? Do you have an experience of this for yourself? Are you aware of going through this for yourself? What does it mean to step into retirement? Like, that's a huge identity shift moment that a lot of people struggle with. Like, I've identified myself as this employee or as this kind of, in the United States, we often say is the first thing when we meet somebody, what's your name? What do you do? And if what you do has changed, then it feels like this whole radical self-identification difference, right? That's an identity shift. So, like, I'm going to give a shout out to my mom, who's navigated this really well for herself. When she knew she wanted to retire from being a travel agent, she really knew that she wanted to have a place to put a lot of her time and energy. She wanted to be a master gardener. So she, in the last year or two that she was working, she planned to work in her job, she also went and took classes and got trained and certified, I guess. So there's some sort of process to be a master gardener. And now she participates in plant clinics and she teaches people about gardening, and she's on the local news station some mornings. So she really prepared herself for this identity shift. She was like, I know I'm going to need help, and I'm going to need some routine, and I'm going to need a community. And she did that, Whereas I see other people going into retirement, something like that, who don't have a plan, right? You just kind of want to put your head in the sand and be like, no, I don't know. I'm just going to ignore this until suddenly I'm faced with it. And then it's overwhelming, And I see people who have big dreams or have stepped in maybe to a new job, or maybe they've said yes to an opportunity, but they don't know how to fully integrate that in themselves. Like, how do I own that this is who I am when I haven't been doing it that long yet? Does that make sense? So that's what I mean when I'm talking about identity shifts. And I'm wondering if that is tracking for you, if you're noticing an identity shift, like a request from spirit for an identity shift for you in your life, and what that's going to take for you. My sense is, if that's what you're facing, you're going to need some kind of support. You need some kind of community around it. You need some kind of routine around it. You need a way to build and integrate this into your life and into your mind and how you think of yourself. So that's what rituals are for. That's what, that's why we go through things like weddings and christenings and, funerals and graduations. Rituals are so important, and we can make them for ourselves. And maybe what you need is a guide. And this is part of what I do with people. It's helpful to hear, Mariah says, it's helpful to hear that it's enough of a thing for a live session. Yeah, right? I mean, we don't talk a lot about this, I feel like, in our culture, about the idea of identity shift, of shifting who you think of yourself as. Because first and foremost, and I see this a lot with my clients, people are like, why don't other people see me or treat me this way when I'm this new person? Some of that comes from having to self-define. Like when I stepped into more of this spiritual path, and I didn't used to be. I have a friend, Rachel Lynn, who likes to remind me that I used to think all this spirit crap was bupkis. I'm like, did I really though? I must have said some very sarcastic things back then, but when I stepped more into the woo, let's just say, and I talk to other people now who are into the woo, into the spiritual stuff, but they're worried about how other people are going to take it. And I say, what's useful for me is, with all of my energy and all of my words and all of the ways that I am with spiritual stuff, I'm constantly telling people, it's okay. This is okay. It's okay to be with this. It's okay to, this is safe. You know what I mean? Like, I have good boundaries, and I'm going to help you hold good boundaries, and we're still going to be grounded in reality, So a lot of people are concerned about explaining what they do, or people approving of who they are now or what they do. And I say, when you really own and integrate your identity, whether or not people think it's weird, it's not going to be weird in the interaction when you just claim it, when you're just like, this is who I am, Everyone else is free to think what they want, but I don't have a question about the fact that I'm a soulnetic. That's not anything that is unintegrated within me. And so it's easier for me to say, It's easier, I think, for a lot of people to have an identity that's very defined. Like being a therapist was easy, because when you say to people, I'm a therapist, it's already predefined. I'm an engineer, I'm an admin assistant, I'm a, whatever. But when you're creating a new identity or stepping into something that's maybe not exactly the norm for you, for your family, for your culture, or whatever, then, really integrating the identity shift is so important. So I'm going to read more of your comment. Yeah, Ryan saying, when you apply for jobs, which version of you will you be where you land? So it's a great question, because here's what's tricky about identity shifts. We're not in charge of them. We're in charge of responding, of listening and responding. But I don't think we get to say who we are, not entirely. We can say what our values are. We can live our values, right? We can say, I'm a person for whom honesty is super important. So, and integrity is super important. So no matter what I do, those choices I will make based on those values, right? But if I had tried to control or know who I was going to become, oh my gosh, I would have been at war with myself and with spirit for a long time. What I've learned to do is listen and respond and accept, okay, so I thought I was going to be a therapist. I didn't even burn out on it. My path was calling me in a different direction. I had no idea I was going to be an energy healer. None. That was not even on my radar. And I just started listening when it started calling me. And it did scare me. I was afraid. I was anxious. I was, discouraged at times. Like, I'm feeling this calling, but I'm not there. And why does it take so long? And why doesn't anyone believe me? Or why do people treat me this way? Or why am I not getting the clients? Oh my gosh, so many things. But I think more than anything, oh my gosh, you guys, there's the funniest little, super light colored grasshopper and he's like, I haven't ever seen a grasshopper in person. I'm going to have to go look up grasshopper spirit animals, and I hope he doesn't try to get in my bag or on me, because, he's hopping around my stuff. That's so funny. All right. I don't know how to turn the camera around, and I just lost him. Because otherwise I would show you, but he was this big. He was so tiny, a little grasshopper. Adorable. So, I totally got distracted by that. But That would be my invitation, is to listen. Oh, there he is. Okay, I'm going to see if I can turn the camera around. I don't know that I can, but he's right here. Ooh, can you see him? Little grasshopper. Oh my gosh. No, don't try to get in my bag. Um, that's so funny. Yeah, I'm going to have to look up what grasshopper means, or maybe you can too. So thank you for sharing, Mariah, and I am curious about anybody else who's watched this video about where you're at with identity shifts and how this lands for you and what questions you have. I'll be happy to answer questions after the video too in the comments. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you another time.